Quantum immortality sounds ridiculous the first time you hear it. The claim is simple enough to repeat, but strange enough to resist belief. From your own point of view, you may never experience your own death. Not because death doesn't happen. Not because the world protects you. But because of how reality might be structured underneath what you see. If the universe allows multiple outcomes at once, if every possibility actually unfolds somewhere, then there will always be at least one version of events where you survive. And if awareness can only continue where it still exists, then from the inside, you would never reach a moment where everything goes black. At first, it sounds like science fiction. Parallel worlds. Alternate versions of you. A loophole in death itself. But the reason people take it seriously has nothing to do with comfort. It comes from a fracture in our best understanding of reality. A place where the math works perfectly, and the explanation doesn't. Because the real question isn't whether you can live forever. It's this. If reality doesn't choose a single outcome, why do you experience a single life? At the smallest scales, the world doesn't behave the way your intuition expects. Particles don't move like tiny billiard balls. They don't follow one clean path from point A to point B. Instead, they exist as a spread of possibilities, a kind of cloud describing all the ways things could turn out. Not here or there. Here and there, and everything in between. Only when something is measured does one outcome show up. One result. One fact. You look, and there it is. But that creates a problem. Because the equations that describe these possibilities never clearly explain why one outcome appears instead of all the others. They don't tell you what counts as a measurement, or when a possibility becomes a reality. Somewhere between the math and your experience, infinite options collapse into a single event. That gap, between possibility and perception, is where the confusion begins. For a long time, the standard explanation was simple. Before you observe something, multiple outcomes exist. After you observe it, one outcome becomes real. Clean. Intuitive. Easy to teach. But there's a weakness hiding inside that simplicity. The theory never tells you what an observer really is. Is it a machine? A detector? A human mind? Where exactly is the line? And if the line isn't clear, then maybe the explanation isn't complete. So another idea emerged. Instead of forcing reality to choose one outcome, what if it never chooses at all? What if every possibility actually happens? Not one world, but many. Not one timeline, but a branching structure where every decision, every event, every microscopic fluctuation creates a split. In one branch, the particle decays. In another, it doesn't. In one branch, something happens. In another, it doesn't. From the outside, all of these branches are equally real. From the inside, you only ever experience one. Not because it's the only one that exists, but because it's the only one you're inside of. And this is where things stop being abstract. Because once you accept that every outcome happens somewhere, a strange asymmetry appears. There are branches where things end. And branches where they don't. And your awareness can only exist in the ones where it continues. Imagine a simple setup. A device connected to a random event. Two possible outcomes. If the result goes one way, the device ends your life instantly. If it goes the other way, nothing happens. Under normal thinking, this is just a deadly gamble. 50% chance you're gone. 50% chance you're still here. But under a branching reality, both outcomes occur. There is a world where the device fires. And a world where it doesn't. From the outside, both are real. From your perspective, there is only one you can ever experience. The one where you are still alive to experience anything at all. Run the experiment once, you find yourself in the surviving branch. Run it again, you're still there. Again. And again. Each time, the branches where you don't survive still exist. But there's no awareness left inside them to register the outcome. So from the inside, it begins to feel like survival is guaranteed. Not because death disappears, but because you never experience the branch where it happens. That's the idea. And this is where it turns dark. Because when people hear immortality, They imagine something stable. A continuous life. A coherent self that simply goes on. But the logic doesn't promise that. It doesn't care about your health. It doesn't care about your identity. It doesn't care whether you are whole. It only requires one thing: that some form of awareness remains. Even if it's broken. Even if it's fragmented. Even if it barely qualifies as a mind at all. You don't need to be fully yourself to continue. You just need to not be completely gone. And that threshold is much lower than anyone wants to admit. Once survival loses its wholeness, it stops looking like a gift. It starts looking like a trap. Because what continues may not be a clear, stable life. It could be something thinner. Something unstable. Moments of awareness flickering in and out. Memory failing. Identity dissolving. Consciousness stuttering like a weak signal. Not a life unfolding, but fragments persisting. Not continuity, but residue. A sequence of broken moments that never fully resolve into nothing, but never fully return to clarity either. At that point, survival stops being something you want. It becomes something you can't escape. And then there's isolation. Because even if you continue, everyone else doesn't come with you. There are branches where they lose you. Where they grieve. Where the world reorganizes itself without you. Even in the branches where you remain, time keeps moving. People age. They weaken. They disappear. The people you love are not dragged into endless continuation just because your awareness keeps slipping into narrower possibilities. So the longer this process goes, the more detached you become from everything that once gave your life meaning. This reveals something uncomfortable. We say we fear death because we want life. But what we actually want is not endless experience. We want continuity that feels like us. We want a self that remains intact. Once that disappears, endless survival loses its appeal. Because more experience is not the same as more life. And that leads to a deeper problem. Even if something continues, is it still you? We assume identity is stable. That the person waking up tomorrow is the same one who went to sleep. But that assumption is fragile. Memory shifts. Beliefs change. The body replaces itself piece by piece. The story evolves slowly enough that you don't notice the drift. But over time, the changes accumulate. So what exactly is the you that's supposed to survive? Think about it. If your mind were altered, your values, your emotions, your perception, while keeping fragments of memory intact, would that still be you? Or just something that inherited your past? We already see this in real life. Severe brain injury. Degenerative illness. The body survives. Awareness continues. But the person becomes different. Not gone. But not the same. There is a difference between a living organism and a preserved self. And that difference matters. Now place that inside a branching universe. Every split creates multiple future versions of you. They share a past. But from that moment on, they diverge. At first, the differences are small. Later, they compound. Different experiences. Different environments. Different outcomes. Eventually, completely different lives. So which one is you? All of them come from you. None of them are identical. The self stops being a line. It becomes a tree. And a tree doesn't have one future. It has many. Some branches grow strong. Some twist. Some end. Some become unrecognizable. The idea of quantum immortality depends on a quiet assumption. That you will always be the one that continues. But that word, you, is doing too much work. Which version? The one imagining the future? The one that survives? Any version that carries enough resemblance? Once identity splits, the concept of a single continuous self begins to break down. What continues may not be you. It may only be something that believes it is you. Memory makes this even more confusing. If a future version carries your memories, it will feel like you from the inside. But that doesn't prove continuity. It only proves inheritance. A copy of you would feel the same way. So would a damaged version built from fragments. The feeling of being you doesn't guarantee that the same center of awareness persisted. It only guarantees that something remembers your past. And this is where the promise begins to collapse. Because the real fear of death isn't abstract. It's personal. It's about this specific perspective ending. The one reading this. The one thinking these thoughts. If that disappears, replaced by something similar but not identical, then nothing has really been saved. What continues is not the self. It's its aftermath. At this point, the idea stops being comforting and starts becoming something else entirely. Not immortality, but fragmentation. Not endless life, but endless variation. The self breaking into descendants that drift further apart over time. Each one claiming continuity. None of them fully preserving it. And then the theory runs into a harder problem. It assumes something about consciousness that may not be true. It treats awareness like a single thread. Something that can move from one version of you to another. But that's not how the mind appears to work. The brain is not a container for a single observer. It's a process. A fragile, physical system built from countless interactions. Change the brain, and the mind changes. Damage it, and identity shifts. Break it enough, and continuity fails. There is no evidence of a detachable self waiting to be redirected into a surviving branch. At best, there are parallel versions. Copies evolving from the same starting point. But a copy is not a continuation. Even if you ignore that, biology creates another problem. Real death is not instant. It's a process. Gradual failure. Oxygen drops. Cells break down. The brain destabilizes. Awareness fades. So where exactly does the escape happen? At what point does consciousness stop fading here and continue somewhere else? When memory is already failing? When identity is already dissolving? There is no clear boundary. And without that boundary, the idea loses its foundation. Then there's probability. If every outcome happens, what does it mean to say you will experience one instead of another? The idea assumes that branches where you die don't count. Because there's no one there to observe them. But that isn't something the equations require. It just feels right. Because death has no witness. But the absence of experience doesn't prove the presence of continued experience somewhere else. It only means you don't observe nothing. And finally, there's a colder issue. A real theory can be wrong. This one can't be tested from the inside. From your perspective, you always survive. Every close call becomes confirmation. From the outside, people just watch you die. So the idea explains everything. And anything that explains everything explains nothing. And yet, it doesn't go away. Because it touches something deeper. The inability to imagine the absence of awareness. You can imagine your funeral. Your absence. The world continuing without you. But all of that happens inside your awareness. You cannot imagine the absence of awareness itself. So the mind searches for alternatives. Stories where something continues. Different forms. Same goal. But there may be something important hidden in the thing we're trying to avoid. An ending. Because endings don't just stop things. They define them. A life matters because it doesn't go on forever. Choices matter because they exclude other paths. Time matters because it runs out. Remove the ending, and meaning starts to dissolve. Not because life becomes infinite, but because it becomes indefinite. And that may be the final reversal. The idea begins as an escape from death. But it ends by making death look necessary. Not desirable. Not fair. But necessary as a boundary. A horizon that gives shape to everything inside it. Because without that boundary, you don't get a life. You get something that never fully resolves. So the question is no longer whether you can escape death. It's simpler than that. Given that you are here, given that this moment is happening, what do you do with it? Because whatever the structure of reality is, one world or many, your life only ever unfolds one moment at a time. One decision at a time. And that is the only place where anything real can still be shaped. You don't control the branches. You don't control how many versions of you exist. You don't control how long any of them last. But you control something smaller. And far more immediate. How you respond. And maybe that's the only form of continuity that actually matters. Not a fixed self moving through time. But a pattern. A direction. A way of being that repeats across moments. You are not a single, permanent thing. You are what you keep choosing. And that doesn't require immortality to matter.